Nimrod is a name that appears only briefly in the Bible, yet his influence is far greater than what most people realize. He is often associated with power, rebellion, and the first great empire after the flood. Despite his short mention in the book of Genesis, his legacy extends through historical records, mythologies, and theological discussions. Who was this mysterious figure? And why do some scholars and theologians consider him a foreshadowing of the Antichrist? For many, Nimrod is simply a name in the genealogies of Genesis, a descendant of Noah through Ham. However, a closer look at his story reveals a man who was more than just a great hunter or a king. He was the first to establish a kingdom on earth, one that would set a precedent for future world empires. The Bible tells us that he founded Babel, a city that would become infamous for its rebellion against God. His ambition was unlike anything seen before, and his influence shaped not only the political landscape of his time, but also the spiritual trajectory of human civilization. What makes Nimrod so significant is the nature of his rebellion. Unlike previous figures in biblical history who sinned individually, Nimrod sought to unify humanity under a single rule, a kingdom that would stand in opposition to God's authority. This has led many to view him as the first prototype of the Antichrist, a ruler who defies God and leads people into a new form of idolatry and disobedience. Throughout history, various interpretations of Nimrod's character have emerged. Some see him as a mighty leader who built civilization after the flood, while others view him as a tyrant who led the first organized rebellion against God. His story intertwines with legends and mythologies from different cultures, making it difficult to separate fact from tradition. But one thing remains clear: his influence did not end with his death. His legacy continues to shape the spiritual and political conflicts of the world today. In this video, we will explore Nimrod's journey from a mighty hunter to a ruler of nations. We will examine his role in the building of Babel and the spiritual implications of his actions. Could it be that his empire was the first attempt at a new world order? And does his story serve as a prophetic warning for the future? The answers lie within the pages of Scripture, historical records, and theological insights. Nimrod's forgotten story is one that demands attention, for in understanding his past, we may gain insight into the future. Nimrod is one of the most mysterious figures in biblical history. In Genesis 10 verse 8 to 9, he is introduced as the son of Cush and described as the first mighty one on the earth. But what does this phrase truly mean? Was Nimrod simply a strong warrior, or was there something more to his influence? His title as a mighty hunter before the Lord has led to various interpretations, ranging from being a skilled provider of food to being a symbol of power and defiance against God. The Hebrew phrase used to describe Nimrod, before the Lord, can carry different connotations. Some scholars argue that it signifies a position of prominence in the sight of God, while others interpret it as a rebellious stance, placing himself in opposition to divine authority. If the latter is true, then Nimrod was not merely a hunter of animals, but a hunter of men, a conqueror who sought to dominate others through force and leadership. Nimrod is often credited as the first great ruler of the post-flood world. According to Genesis 10 verse 10, he established a kingdom that included Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. This region, historically linked to Mesopotamia, became the cradle of early civilization. The cities he founded or ruled over played a crucial role in human history, forming the foundation of what would later become the Babylonian and Assyrian empires. Historical records suggest that Mesopotamia was among the earliest regions where centralized government and organized societies emerged. Cities like Babel grew into powerful centers of culture, commerce, and military strength. Nimrod, as the founder of these cities, was likely a unifier of people who imposed his rule over various tribes and settlements. His ability to consolidate power suggests that he possessed extraordinary leadership skills, charisma, and military strategy. The rapid urbanization of Mesopotamia during this time aligns with the biblical description of Nimrod's activities. Archaeological discoveries indicate that cities such as Uruk were already developing advanced societal structures, including temples, administrative buildings, and fortified walls. This supports the idea that Nimrod's rule was not just about military conquest, but also about governance and societal organization. Nimrod's rise to power was exceptional in its time. Before him, there is little biblical or historical evidence of kingship or large-scale political control. Most early human societies were likely small family-based groups that had not yet developed into structured nations. Nimrod, however, appears to have broken this pattern by creating one of the first centralized states. His leadership extended beyond simple tribal rule. He was a ruler who united people under a common purpose, whether through force or persuasion. The Bible does not provide details on his methods, but considering the historical context, it is likely that his rule was marked by a combination of military campaigns, alliances, and perhaps even religious influence. Some traditions, particularly those from extra-biblical sources like the writings of Flavius Josephus, depict Nimrod as a tyrant who sought to turn people away from God. According to Josephus, Nimrod was instrumental in convincing people to rely on their own strength rather than on divine guidance. He supposedly encouraged them to build great cities and fortifications, ensuring that humanity would not be vulnerable again as they were during the flood. Nimrod's reign was not just about power and governance. It also had spiritual implications. Many scholars believe that he played a key role in the early development of religious systems that moved away from worshiping the one true God. The cities he established later became centers of idol worship and paganism, suggesting that his influence extended beyond politics into spirituality. This idea is further supported by later historical developments in Mesopotamia. Babylon, one of the key cities associated with Nimrod, became a hub for false religions, astrology, and the deification of kings. If Nimrod truly was a leader who encouraged rebellion against God, then his impact on the spiritual direction of humanity was profound and long-lasting. As mentioned earlier, the name Nimrod may derive from the Hebrew root marid, meaning to rebel. If this is accurate, it reinforces the idea that he was not just a ruler, but a figure who symbolized opposition to divine authority. His actions, as described in both biblical and historical sources, align with this interpretation. He was not merely an empire builder. He was a challenger of God's rule, setting the stage for one of history's greatest spiritual conflicts. Nimrod's rise from hunter to king marked a turning point in human history. He was a warrior, a ruler, and possibly a spiritual leader who led humanity down a path that opposed God. His influence shaped the development of early civilizations, and his legacy continued to affect generations long after his death. As we move forward, we will examine one of the most significant events associated with Nimrod, the construction of the Tower of Babel. This ambitious project would become the ultimate symbol of human pride and defiance against God, leading to one of the most dramatic interventions in history. After establishing himself as a powerful ruler, Nimrod's ambitions extended beyond military conquest and governance. His vision was not merely about controlling a kingdom, but about unifying humanity under a singular authority that stood independent of divine rule. This ambition reached its peak in the construction of one of the most infamous structures in history, the Tower of Babel. The biblical account in Genesis 11 verse 1-9 describes a time when all people spoke a single language and lived together in harmony. It was during this period that they decided to build a city with a tower that would reach the heavens. While the Bible does not explicitly name Nimrod as the leader of this project, His role as the founder of Babel and his reputation as a mighty leader strongly suggest that he was at the center of this monumental endeavor. The Tower of Babel was far more than an architectural achievement. It was a declaration of human pride, a challenge to divine authority, and an attempt to establish a kingdom where human ambition replaced submission to God. The people of Babel said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Genesis 11 verse 4. This statement reveals their true motivations. They were not building for the sake of survival or even prosperity. They were building to establish their own legacy and power apart from God. The phrase, "whose top is in the heavens," suggests that they sought to ascend to divine heights, either symbolically or literally, asserting their dominance over creation. Some scholars believe that the tower was not just a physical structure, but a religious one, an early attempt to create a man-made gateway between earth and the divine realm. Nimrod's role in this rebellion is evident in historical and extra-biblical sources. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus wrote that Nimrod was the one who convinced the people to build the tower, urging them to rely on their own strength rather than trusting in God. According to Josephus, Nimrod mocked God, claiming that he would build a tower so high that it would withstand any future flood, ensuring that humanity would never again be at the mercy of divine judgment. This suggests that the tower was not only a display of power, but also an act of defiance, a statement that mankind could control its own destiny without God's interference. If this interpretation is correct, then Babel was the first recorded attempt at a centralized human government that sought to remove God from its foundation. God's response to this rebellion was swift. Genesis 11 verse 5 to 7 states, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." This divine intervention was not just about halting the construction of a tower. It was about preventing humanity from reaching a level of unity that would allow them to continue their rebellion unchecked. By confusing their language, God disrupted their ability to communicate and cooperate, forcing them to abandon the project and scatter across the earth. The consequences of Babel were profound. What had once been a unified people now became divided by language and culture. The scattering of nations marked the beginning of human civilization as we know it, with different groups developing their own distinct identities. However, the spirit of Babel did not die with the tower's destruction. Throughout history, there have been repeated attempts to create a world order that seeks to establish human greatness apart from God. The Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman empires all carried echoes of Babel, each striving for global dominance and control. Even today, the desire for a unified world government, a society free from divine influence, continues to manifest in various political and ideological movements. Babel's significance extends beyond ancient history. The book of Revelation refers to Babylon as a symbol of human corruption, false religion, and rebellion against God. Revelation 18 verse 2 describes it as the dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit. This suggests that Babel was not merely a historical event, but a recurring theme in human history, the constant struggle between divine authority and human pride. Nimrod's vision, though temporarily thwarted, would continue to shape the course of civilizations. The story of Babel is a warning about the dangers of human arrogance and the consequences of rejecting God's authority. It serves as a reminder that no matter how advanced or powerful humanity becomes, it is ultimately subject to divine will. Nimrod's dream of a unified world without God ended in failure, but his legacy did not disappear. In the next chapter, we will explore how his empire laid the groundwork for future civilizations that would continue his legacy of rebellion and attempt to establish global rule independent of God. Nimrod was not merely a ruler of cities, nor was his ambition confined to local dominance. His empire, centered in the land of Shinar, represents the first recorded attempt at a unified human civilization that sought to build a world apart from God. The Bible tells us that Nimrod established a kingdom, an unusual statement considering that no formal governments or monarchies had been mentioned prior to his time. His was not just any kingdom. It was the first example of centralized political power, a world order that rejected divine rule in favor of human supremacy. Nimrod was the first to rise above mere tribal leadership and assert dominance over multiple regions, setting a pattern for later empires that would follow his rebellious path. The description of Nimrod as a mighty one on the earth suggests a strength and authority that exceeded that of ordinary men. The term mighty is often associated with warriors and conquerors, implying that he was not just a hunter of animals, but a hunter of men, one who subdued people through force, military power, and strategic alliances. He did not simply rule. He established control over vast territories, bringing together various groups under one authority. His kingdom was the first prototype of empire building, an organized system where men could rise to power and rule over others rather than live in familial or tribal independence. But what made Nimrod's kingdom so different from those that came after him? It was the first known human attempt to create a centralized civilization without God at its core. In the time after the flood, God's command to humanity was clear: be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth. Genesis 9 verse 1. This directive was meant to encourage the dispersion of mankind across the world, ensuring that people would spread out and populate the earth according to God's design. But Nimrod resisted this divine order. Instead of allowing people to disperse, he brought them together into a single political entity, creating a powerful society that depended on human strength rather than divine provision. This was not just an act of governance. It was an act of defiance. Nimrod's actions were in direct opposition to God's command, and in doing so, he established a dangerous precedent. For the first time in recorded history, there was a kingdom that did not acknowledge God as its ruler. This kingdom was built on the idea that human beings could create their own security, their own power, and their own legacy without divine oversight. It was the first attempt at a self-sufficient civilization, a humanistic society where God was no longer seen as necessary. The Bible tells us that the cities Nimrod established, Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, were in the land of Shinar, an area historically associated with early Mesopotamian civilization. Babel, later known as Babylon, would become one of the most infamous cities in history, repeatedly representing human rebellion against God. Later empires such as Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome would follow in the footsteps of Nimrod, each attempting to unify the world through military conquest, economic power, and political dominance. One of the most striking aspects of Nimrod's legacy is the connection between his kingdom and the future world empires that opposed God's people. Babylon, the city he founded, would go on to become the seat of power for Nebuchadnezzar, who took the Israelites into captivity. Assyria, another empire linked to the region of Nimrod's conquests, would later conquer the northern tribes of Israel. The spiritual significance of Nimrod's rebellion seems to extend far beyond his lifetime, influencing the rise and fall of great civilizations that sought to control the world through human ambition rather than divine guidance. Many scholars and theologians believe that Nimrod's influence did not end with his death. Some argue that his spirit of rebellion has continued throughout history, manifesting in various global movements and empires that seek to establish power apart from God. The idea that his legacy lingers is reinforced by biblical prophecy, particularly in references to Babylon as a symbol of spiritual corruption. Revelation 17 describes Mystery Babylon, a system that deceives the nations and stands in opposition to God. The connection between Nimrod's kingdom and this future Babylon suggests that his influence is not merely historical, but prophetic. Nimrod was not just a historical figure. He was the first example of a ruler who sought to elevate himself above divine authority. His kingdom was built on the idea that humanity could rule itself without God, a philosophy that has persisted throughout history. As we examine the future implications of Nimrod's legacy, we must ask, is his spirit still at work today? Does his vision of a unified world under human rule continue to shape modern societies? Nimrod's ambition to create a world order independent of God did not end with his own rule. His influence set a precedent for the future, one that many believe will culminate in the rise of the Antichrist. Throughout history, numerous figures have embodied the characteristics of Nimrod, rulers who sought absolute power, established centralized control, and turned nations away from God. Yet, the final fulfillment of this spirit of rebellion is prophesied in the Bible, where a leader will emerge to deceive the world, unite nations under a false peace, and stand in direct opposition to God. The similarities between Nimrod and the Antichrist are striking. Both are described as mighty rulers who seek to unify the world under their authority. Likewise, the Antichrist is described in Daniel 7 verse 25 as one who shall speak pompous words against the Most High, and in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 4 as one who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. This parallel suggests that Nimrod was not just an ancient king, but a prototype of a greater rebellion that would resurface in the end times. One of the key aspects of both Nimrod and the Antichrist is their pursuit of a one-world government. Nimrod's empire was the first attempt to unite humanity under a single system that excluded God, and his construction of Babel was the ultimate expression of that vision. Similarly, the Antichrist is prophesied to establish a global system where he will exercise absolute control over commerce, governance, and even religious worship. Revelation 13 verse 7 states that he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation, indicating a rule that mirrors Nimrod's desire for a unified world. Another critical connection between Nimrod and the Antichrist is the role of Babel. Nimrod sought to build a tower that would reach into the heavens, an act of defiance that led to God's direct intervention. The book of Revelation refers to Mystery Babylon as the center of end-time deception, a system that draws people away from God and into idolatry. Revelation 17 verse 5 calls it Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. This suggests that the rebellious spirit of Babel did not die with Nimrod, but will reach its full manifestation in the future, where humanity will once again attempt to build a world apart from God under the leadership of the Antichrist. Both Nimrod and the Antichrist also share characteristics of being worshipped. Ancient traditions suggest that Nimrod became a deified figure after his death, worshipped as a god in various cultures under different names. The Antichrist, according to biblical prophecy, will demand worship for himself, setting up an image in the temple and declaring himself to be God. This desire to replace God with human authority is a direct continuation of Nimrod's original rebellion. Perhaps the most significant connection between Nimrod and the Antichrist is their relationship with deception. Nimrod convinced the people of his time that their security depended on human effort rather than divine guidance. He led them to believe that they could build a civilization that did not require God's protection or rule. The Antichrist, in a similar manner, will deceive the world with false promises of peace and security. Daniel 8 verse 25 states that, through his cunning, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule. And Jesus warns in Matthew 24 verse 24 that false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive. The pattern of Nimrod's rebellion has repeated itself throughout history, appearing in various world leaders who sought to create global empires and suppress faith in God. From the kingdoms of Babylon and Rome to modern movements that promote human self-sufficiency and global unity without God, the spirit of Nimrod has never truly left the world. However, biblical prophecy warns that the final and greatest expression of this rebellion will come in the form of the Antichrist, whose rule will bring about the ultimate confrontation between human pride and divine justice. Understanding Nimrod as a foreshadowing of the Antichrist helps us recognize the recurring patterns of history and the spiritual forces at work behind human events. The Bible teaches that just as God intervened at Babel to scatter the nations and disrupt Nimrod's plans, he will also bring judgment upon the final Babylon and its leader. Revelation 18 verse 2 declares, "Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit. The same spirit that drove Nimrod to defy God will ultimately lead to the Antichrist's downfall." Nimrod's rebellion against God was not limited to political power or the establishment of the first great kingdom. His influence extended into the spiritual realm, shaping the foundation of pagan religions that spread across the ancient world. Many scholars believe that the system of idol worship and mystery religions that emerged in Babylon can be traced back to him and his legacy. His name, though rarely mentioned explicitly in historical records outside the Bible, appears to be hidden within various myths and deities worshipped by ancient civilizations. His wife, Semiramis, and their supposed son, Tammuz, became central figures in these religious systems, creating a framework for false worship that would endure for millennia. Ancient traditions suggest that Nimrod did not merely rule as a king, but was later deified, worshipped as a god in various cultures under different names. After his death, his wife, Semiramis, played a crucial role in elevating his status to that of a divine being. She claimed that Nimrod had become the sun god, the great provider and ruler of the heavens. In doing so, she established a religion that focused on worshiping Nimrod as a deity, setting the foundation for polytheism and the many forms of sun worship that followed. This belief system became a central element in many pagan religions, where the sun was revered as the supreme god, often represented by different names across cultures. Semiramis in these traditions also claimed that she miraculously conceived a son, Tammuz, who was presented as the reincarnation of Nimrod. This story became the basis for the mother-child worship that spread throughout the world, appearing in Egyptian, Greek, Roman, and other mythologies. The imagery of a mother holding a divine child became a central theme in many religious systems, long before the birth of Christ. In Egypt, this was seen in the worship of Isis and Horus. In Greece, it appeared in the form of Aphrodite and Eros. In Rome, it became Venus and Cupid. Though the names changed, the core idea remained: a powerful queen goddess figure who bore a divine son. The worship of Tammuz became widespread, and the Bible itself references this practice. In Ezekiel 8 verse 14, the prophet is shown women weeping for Tammuz, an indication of how deeply ingrained this false worship had become even among the Israelites. Tammuz was seen as a dying and resurrecting god, a deity associated with the agricultural cycles of life and death. This belief in a god who dies and comes back to life became a recurring theme in mystery religions, influencing later pagan systems that incorporated the idea of a savior figure who undergoes death and rebirth. The influence of Nimrod's religious system did not remain confined to Babylon. As people scattered after the fall of Babel, They carried with them the foundational elements of this worship, adapting and modifying it according to their own cultures. In Mesopotamia, Nimrod became known as Marduk. In Canaan, he was worshipped as Baal. In Egypt, he appeared as Osiris. The Greeks identified him with Zeus, while the Romans associated him with Jupiter. Though the names differed, the essential characteristics remained the same: a powerful, rebellious figure who sought divine status and was worshipped as a supreme deity. These mystery religions often involved secret knowledge, rituals, and ceremonies designed to bring initiates into deeper spiritual enlightenment. Many of these practices included symbolic death and rebirth, mirroring the myths surrounding Nimrod and Tammuz. The use of sacred symbols, hidden meanings, and esoteric teachings became hallmarks of these religious systems, forming the basis for later occult traditions and secret societies. One of the most enduring aspects of Nimrod's influence is how his religious system laid the groundwork for Babylonian occultism, which in turn shaped many mystical traditions throughout history. The Book of Revelation describes Mystery Babylon as a symbol of worldwide spiritual deception, indicating that the false worship system originating in Babylon would continue until the end of time. Revelation 17 verse 5 refers to this system as Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth, reinforcing the idea that Babylon was not just a historical empire, but a spiritual force that persists. This spiritual deception did not remain in the ancient world. Elements of Nimrod's religious system can still be seen in various modern movements, philosophies, and secret organizations that promote hidden knowledge, enlightenment, and self-deification. Many secret societies, including those that claim to possess ancient wisdom, trace their roots to the mystery traditions that originated in Babylon. The belief that mankind can achieve divinity through knowledge and enlightenment is a direct continuation of the rebellion that began with Nimrod. The impact of Nimrod's religious influence cannot be overstated. His desire to replace God's authority with human rule was not limited to governance, but extended into spirituality, creating a system that turned people away from the true God and toward false worship. This system did not die with Babylon's fall, but continued to evolve, influencing later empires, religious traditions, and philosophical movements. As we continue to examine his legacy, we must ask, if Nimrod's influence shaped the religions and ideologies of the past, is his spirit still present in today's world? In the next chapter, we will explore how Nimrod met his end and what his downfall teaches us about the fate of those who stand in defiance against God. The Bible provides little detail about the end of Nimrod's life, leaving his fate largely shrouded in mystery. Genesis 10 records his rise to power, his establishment of a kingdom, and his reputation as a mighty hunter before the Lord, but it does not describe how he died. However, various historical and extra-biblical sources offer different accounts of his demise, many of which suggest that Nimrod's reign ended in violence and disgrace. Given his role as the first great rebel against God's authority, it is reasonable to believe that his end was not peaceful. The circumstances surrounding Nimrod's death are commonly traced back to the writings of Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian from the 1st century. In Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus characterizes Nimrod as a ruthless ruler who deliberately led people away from God by persuading them to rely solely on human wisdom and power. Josephus portrays Nimrod's reign as marked by pride and arrogance, encouraging his subjects to trust in him rather than divine authority. If this depiction is accurate, Nimrod's violent demise aligns with historical patterns where leaders who elevate themselves above others are eventually overthrown by the same forces they tried to dominate. A widely held belief is that Nimrod was killed by one of his own relatives, possibly Shem, the righteous son of Noah. This theory suggests that as Nimrod's influence grew and his rebellion against God intensified, Shem, who remained faithful to the worship of the true God, took action to put an end to Nimrod's rule. According to certain ancient traditions, Shem and his followers saw Nimrod as a direct threat to God's order and decided to eliminate him as a warning to others. Some versions of this account claim that Nimrod was executed and his body dismembered, with pieces sent to different regions as a message that rebellion against God would not be tolerated. Another variation of Nimrod's death suggests that he was overthrown by a rival faction within his kingdom. As is often the case with powerful rulers, the same ambition and drive that allowed them to rise to power can also lead to their downfall. If Nimrod ruled with an iron fist, exerting control over his people through fear and intimidation, it is entirely possible that his own subjects turned against him. In this scenario, Nimrod's empire may have collapsed due to internal strife, with different factions seeking to claim power for themselves. There are also ancient Mesopotamian legends that some scholars associate with Nimrod, particularly those concerning kings who were either assassinated or who fell out of favor with the gods and were destroyed. Some of these stories speak of a great ruler who became so arrogant that the gods cast him down, either by direct intervention or by allowing his enemies to rise up against him. While these accounts do not explicitly name Nimrod, they reflect a recurring theme in ancient history, that those who seek to elevate themselves to the status of gods ultimately face destruction. Regardless of the exact circumstances of Nimrod's death, the lesson from his downfall is clear. No ruler, no matter how powerful, can defy God and escape judgment. Nimrod's attempt to create a kingdom independent of God did not succeed. The Tower of Babel was destroyed, his empire fragmented, and his influence, though long-lasting in the form of false religions and rebellious ideologies, did not lead to the eternal dominance he may have envisioned. His life serves as a warning about the dangers of pride, rebellion, and self-exaltation. Many rulers throughout history have followed in Nimrod's footsteps, seeking to establish their own power and glorify themselves rather than submit to divine authority. And like Nimrod, many of these rulers have met tragic ends. The words of Proverbs 16 verse 18 ring especially true in this context. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Nimrod's legacy is not just one of power and ambition, but of inevitable judgment. His name is associated with the first great kingdom after the flood, but also with the first great rebellion. His attempt to unite mankind in defiance of God ended in confusion and dispersion. His influence in the development of false religions continues to be felt, but his personal fate stands as a stark reminder that no one can stand against God and prevail. As we move forward, we must ask, if Nimrod's spirit of rebellion did not end with his death, does it still influence the world today? The same forces that fueled Nimrod's ambitions appear to be at work in modern society, shaping global movements that strive to build a world apart from God. This ongoing legacy can be seen in modern ideologies, secret societies, and the relentless push for a unified global order that echoes the rebellion of Babel. Though Nimrod himself is long dead, many believe that his spirit, his legacy of rebellion, self-exaltation, and defiance against God has never truly left the world. His influence can be seen throughout history in the rise of empires, the spread of false religions, and the ongoing attempts to unify the world under human authority rather than divine rule. Today, in an age of increasing globalization, technological advancements, and political movements pushing for centralized control, the spirit of Nimrod seems more alive than ever. Could it be that his influence is still preparing the way for the final Antichrist? The pattern of Nimrod's rebellion has echoed throughout human history. The desire to build a world without God, to unify people under a single government, and to create systems that prioritize human wisdom over divine authority has been a recurring theme among the most powerful civilizations. From ancient Babylon to the Roman Empire, from the Enlightenment era to modern globalist ideologies, the world has continuously sought to establish a new version of Babel, a society where mankind rules itself without God's interference. These efforts are not merely political or economic. They carry deep spiritual significance. In today's world, the idea of a one-world government is no longer just a theory, but a serious conversation among political and economic leaders. Organizations and movements advocating for global governance, international cooperation, and centralized economic control often present their visions as progressive and necessary for peace. However, beneath the surface, these movements bear striking similarities to Nimrod's original plan to unite mankind under a humanistic system that replaces God with man-made authority. This is not to say that all forms of unity are inherently evil, but history has shown that when human power is centralized without submission to God, corruption, oppression, and rebellion against divine truth inevitably follow. The influence of Nimrod's legacy is also evident in the continued spread of ancient Babylonian religious ideas. Mystery religions, occult practices, and secret societies that trace their origins back to the worship systems established in Babylon still thrive in various forms. Symbols associated with sun worship, fertility cults, and esoteric knowledge can be found in modern media, government institutions, and even some religious traditions. The same deception that Nimrod promoted, the idea that man can become like God through knowledge and power, remains a central theme in many contemporary spiritual movements. Perhaps the most significant way in which Nimrod's spirit is still at work today is in the increasing rejection of God's authority in favor of human exaltation. The push to remove God from education, government, and public life mirrors Nimrod's original rebellion. The rise of philosophies that celebrate self-sufficiency, deny absolute truth, and promote moral relativism is a reflection of the same ideology that led to the construction of Babel. Just as Nimrod convinced the people of his time that they could build a world without God, many today are being led to believe that human progress, science, and technology can replace faith, morality, and divine guidance. The question remains, is this movement leading to something even greater? Many theologians believe that the spirit of Nimrod is not just influencing world affairs, but actively paving the way for the final Antichrist. The Bible describes a coming world leader who will unite nations under his authority, demand worship, and establish a global system of control. This leader will embody the ultimate rebellion against God, much like Nimrod did in his time. His rule will be marked by deception, promising peace and unity, while ultimately leading people away from the truth. The book of Revelation refers to the final world empire as Babylon the Great, a direct reference to the system first established by Nimrod. Revelation 17 verse 5 calls it mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. This suggests that the same spiritual rebellion that began in Babel will reach its climax in the last days. Just as God intervened at Babel to scatter the nations and disrupt Nimrod's plans, he will also bring judgment upon the final Babylon, ensuring that human pride and rebellion cannot stand against his ultimate authority. As we look at the world today, it is clear that the spirit of Nimrod has never truly disappeared. His vision of a unified, godless world continues to shape political ideologies, cultural movements, and global agendas. His influence is present in the rejection of divine truth, the rise of self-worship, and the push for centralized power that removes God from the equation. Whether or not his literal bloodline has survived is irrelevant. His spiritual legacy remains as strong as ever. The story of Nimrod is more than an ancient historical account. It is a warning that echoes throughout time. His life serves as an example of what happens when human pride, rebellion, and ambition take precedence over obedience to God. Nimrod was not merely a king or a hunter. He was the first recorded figure to actively lead a movement against divine authority, attempting to build a world that glorified human strength rather than submitting to the Creator. His legacy did not end with his death. His influence can be seen in the rise of empires, the formation of false religions, and the modern world's increasing push to remove God from every aspect of life. Understanding Nimrod's story allows us to recognize these patterns and avoid falling into the same traps. Nimrod's life offers a clear warning about the dangers of pride. Instead of leading people toward God, he built a kingdom rooted in self-glory and rebellion. The Tower of Babel symbolized human arrogance, prompting God's direct intervention. As Proverbs 16 verse 18 says, "Pride goes before destruction." Nimrod's downfall proves it. His story also highlights the threat of centralized power that excludes God. Nimrod's attempt to unify humanity without divine guidance echoes throughout history, where systems built on human strength alone end in corruption and collapse. Unity without God always leads to destruction. Deception is another key lesson. Nimrod convinced people they didn't need God, a lie still active today. Trusting in progress, science, or politics over faith leads us down the same path of self-reliance and spiritual emptiness. Perhaps the most important lesson from Nimrod's story is the need for faithfulness to God in a world that constantly pushes against him. Nimrod's legacy has persisted, but so has the call to remain faithful to the one true God. The world continues to follow in his footsteps, promoting ideologies that reject divine authority. Yet the Bible reminds us that true wisdom comes from fearing the Lord. Psalm 111 verse 10 states, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." A good understanding have all those who do his commandments in a time when many are being led astray by human philosophies, political movements, and false spiritual teachings. Believers are called to stand firm in the truth. The story of Nimrod is a reminder that the battle between human pride and divine authority is ongoing. Each generation faces the choice of whether to follow in Nimrod's footsteps or to submit to God's rule. His life teaches us that while rebellion may seem powerful for a time, it always ends in judgment. But for those who seek God, there is hope, peace, and a future that no earthly kingdom can provide. The world will continue to build its own Babels, but ultimately, it is God's kingdom that will endure forever. If you found this video insightful and thought-provoking, we encourage you to support this channel by subscribing. Don't forget to like this video, as it helps spread this important message to more people. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and share your perspective on what we discussed today. And most importantly, share this video with your family, friends, and loved ones, so that together we can continue to uncover the hidden truths of history and prophecy. Thank you for watching, and may you always seek wisdom and truth in a world that so often tries to lead us astray.